little about that at the end, but I don't want to hijack the conversation. I want to recognize each of you, especially, I'm smiling really big, especially for those of you who mentioned botany, because now you're really talking to my heart. And I will say that after 30 years at the Smithsonian, where I served on education planning teams, I'm sure you saw my short bio, I moved to another part of the federal government, the National Park Service. And we have more than 450 national parks in the United States. And I thought, well, this is a really interesting chance to see all of those national parks, whether they're teaching history or geography or environmental science or all of the above, culture. They are collections. They are collections, period. They are wonderful collections of resources. And what would it be like to work with content in national parks as opposed to content in museums and the object-based storytelling that we do in museums. And so I spent 10 years with the National Park Foundation helping to raise money for education programs. My two things that make me quite proud are postdoctoral fellowship programs that I started in humanities and in science. And because of the current circumstance in the government, we raised tens of millions of dollars to run those postdoctoral fellowship programs, and they were quite successful, except up until the last year, when you may know that we have new executive orders in the United States that prevent us from teaching inclusive history because we are reverting back to a time when we can only say great and wonderful things about the United States and not some of the harder history. And so the foundation was forced by the Federal Park Service to give tens of millions of dollars back to the individuals and the organizations and the other foundations that we raised the money from. And therefore, my programs were canceled. I say mine, but that's just because I loved them and started them, grew them up from tiny little seeds, let's say, but they are no longer running in the Park Service. And so at the moment, I am not employed, and I'm thinking about what it's possible to do here next. So my background in terms of my formal education is biology and botany with a master's in museum studies. And so everybody there who's studied life sciences, well, I'm right there with you. And everybody who's in the mechanical and physics and chemistry and engineering, well, I adore those subjects too, and they're obviously really important. And we will talk a little bit more about them as well. But all right, so let's get started. And can everybody hear me okay? Everybody can see the slides? We're good to go?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Fabulous. Now, let me also say, because I believe that you're going to meet John Falk, and I don't know if you have already spoken with him or if that's coming in February or into the future, but I intentionally stayed away from exhibit evaluation and the work that he and Lynn have been doing and that others have been doing, because I knew that you would have, or I believe that you will have the chance to meet with him. But of course, everything that I'm going to talk about is predicated on how we really know what we know, and by that I mean, sorry about that. Not sure.
Sorry about that. Sir, I think Rotila sir phone, or otherwise he has started to. He has started from mobile also. He has joined. Sir, you use either phone or computer. He has started from mobile also. He has joined. Sir, you.
You can mute him, sir.
Yeah, you can admin. Already muted. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's okay now. I think it's fine. Thank you. So obviously a crucial part about learning in museums and learning in any informal environment like a park it means that we need to understand and look at visitors doing what it is that they're doing and form a relationship with the learning and the things that we want to happen in the exhibits or in these spaces. And that's what John will talk about. But everything that I have done in my life and in my work is also based on building prototypes, talking with visitors, doing audience research, so that we're not just academically pontificating about what it is that we think we're trying to achieve, but we have some evidence at the end of that we know that we are on the right track or that we can make changes to what we're doing to make it more effective. So my talk will steer away from that, just to give you a little bit of a view into the way I think about learning and what excites me, especially what goes on in our brains. So the idea that before content there's connection is that all learning is emotional, right? 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, with Piaget or Maslow's pyramid of learning, we didn't exactly know what learning was. We actually thought, well, there's kind of a formula. And as long as we stick with this formula and we're very structured and we repeat what we're saying, 100 times, and we make kids study through repetition, that's what learning looks like. And of course, over the last century, what it means to learn and be a learner has changed so much, because we now know that's not actually what learning is. What learning is forming an emotional connection with whatever the content is. And that really excites me. So to kick us off, I would love for you each to tell me, or everybody doesn't have to, because maybe that would take too long, but something that happened in your day today. Funny thing, weird thing, didn't have a good lunch, took a nice walk, saw some birds. I'll get us started. I was telling you that here it's very dark because it's now a little after 5 o'clock in the morning and it's not my normal time to be awake. So I can say that the first thing that happened in my morning was that I made a little cup of coffee and I'm sipping it. So now I throw it to you. Tell me something about your day so far, because it's much later for you than it is for me.
Hi, ma'am. So, well, something funny happened today is that because I have been interested in bird watching and knowing a lot of birds, my friends accused me that whenever I spot a bird, I come up with a new name. So, I mean, I was a little sad that they said that, but I'm not really, even I am learning right now. So, yeah, that's something funny that happened today. Is she out?
Any other?
Here, if you, I guess I'm sharing my screen so you can't see what's going on next to me, but I have a dog that's sitting right here and she's very hungry for her breakfast because she too is not used to being up quite this early. And if you see my arm poke up and down like this every once in a while, it's just because she's pushing she's pushing against my arm and she wants some food. She wants some food. So is there anything that you would like to ask me, either about the work professionally or personally, or shall we just roll on?
Ma'am, I would like to ask something. So, I'm interested in science communication, but I am more interested in becoming a science illustrator. So, if I were to become a museum curator, is there any chance of in which I could do something about my passion towards science illustration? Can there be work or any kind of project which can integrate science along with art, and especially art like comes under informal form of education? So what's your opinion about it?
Well, visualizing science, especially in trying to aggregate information and interpret it visually, but not just with bar charts and technical looking kinds of charts, is really crucial. In fact, the National Park Service, in the before times, not exactly right now, but in the before times when we were able to talk about climate change and speak more appropriately and honestly about science and the environment, they had opened up a whole new channel of work in the Park Service around visualization of scientific data and different ways to do that with different kinds of audiences. And so through blogs and online journals and daily communications, all of the national parks had the opportunity to contribute a point of current research that might be going on in the park, something historical, something cultural, but all through online communication media that the parks themselves generated, and then were disseminated across the whole National Park Service to every single park, so that everybody could learn, oh, they're in Rocky Mountains, they think they've just discovered a different invasive species that might become a problem for their marshlands. And even though here we are in New York, we want to share that because the parks, part of it is what are you communicating scientifically? And then part of it is to show the organization as a whole as a vibrant research center that is putting this effort into visually communicating. I mean, I know that because of the technology, you understand that like hand illustration and stuff, at least at the Smithsonian and in the United States, is almost a dying art, but everybody draws on their laptop. And so it still happens. It just happens in a different way, but it's quite important. And I mean, in terms of an opportunity for a job, if the organization supports that kind of communication, through illustrations to break the data down and make it more accessible to people, then there will be jobs, because there will be vehicles for you to be putting these visualizations into, and the intention to communicate that information with the staff around the whole NCSM and with the public. All right. In terms of learning, my subject here today, and what we just did, even though it was like friendly exchange and just some banter and to get to know each other a little bit more, what we did is the foundation of learning. All learning works that way. We shared a little bit of personal information. We said something about ourselves, where we are, who we are. We started to pick up a little bit of cultural context, and it was social. And so, like, it's as simple as that, right? Together, we explored, we collaborated, we engaged in some conversation, and that's really the basis of all learning. And it's not any more complicated than that. It's just that in our environments where we don't necessarily control how people encounter the content that we're presenting, we're never quite so sure how, what people are getting and how they're able to process it. But that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more. So something that has always excited me, like for 30 or 40 years, is what does learning look like in our brain? Because we're used to thinking about what learning looks like in a museum, in a classroom, outside on the sidewalk, in a library, online. We experience these environments every day. And as professionals working in the museum space, we're trying to communicate science to people. But we only tend to see that from our perspective to the visitor, or our perspective to the students, or our perspective to whoever the audience may be. But the thing that everybody in this room, all of us have in common, is that the same centers of our brain light up when we are doing certain kinds of activities. And we know that because for decades, people have been looking at the brains of people when they're learning things, or if they have a problem and they're unable to learn things, if they have attention deficit disorder, what things get blocked when the brain can't process and move information around. But I really want to pause here on this thinking about cognition from this biological, mechanical way that it happens in our brain, because we tend to say, oh, everybody that walks into the museum is different and the content needs to be accessible. Yes, and yes, and yes, it's true. But why do we need to think that way? Because nothing sticks unless something connects in our brain and can move to the place where we've created some memory. And that's what we're all striving to be able to accomplish. So rather than just looking at it like, what do I see a visitor doing at that exhibit? You know, here are the 7 characteristics of a family-friendly exhibit. Is it multimodal? Is it multi-sided? Can you collaborate when you're doing it? Think about this. Think about when you see something, a certain part of your brain is ignited. When you physically do a task, like it's a hands-on interactive, or you're doing something to manipulate or digital, a different part of your brain engages. And when you hear something, a different part of your brain engages. So, okay, aha, why is it good for there to be sound, for there to be strong visuals, for there to be easy to understand reading, readable text in labels? It's because we want that stuff to stick inside our head, because that's what learning and memory is all about. So break it down with me a little bit more and really, really think about this. When we read, a part of our brain is stimulated. When we speak, a part of our brain is stimulated. So why is it important that families or school kids in a class have the opportunity to talk about something that they're doing in an exhibit? It's not because the act of talking is, we tend to see it from the outside, right? Oh, it's a social behavior. Social behaviors are good. John Falk will talk a lot about that. Social behaviors are great, but these images tell us why. Because it's how memories are made. And the more layers of multiple parts of the brain that we can be stimulating at one time, the greater the chance that the thing that we're paying attention to will get encoded here in our head. We will store it someplace, and maybe we'll be able to retrieve it and use it again in the future. That is learning, right? That is learning. And so as we see that learning manifest itself at our exhibitions and in our public programs, and we're happy because we see kids laughing, or we're curious because we see someone struggling to understand something, I just encourage you from this time forward, follow this subject about what learning looks like in the brain, because it's even more interesting, to me anyway, than just what parts of our brain we're using for different processes. Something that we've always said is we want museums to be places where people can experience things they might not experience anyplace else, that we present content that provokes curiosity, that gives people new tools, new information. Museums for us, because we idolize them and we care about them and we know they have this power, they are places for giving people something. We're very much in the business of giving. That's what learning is. You know, if I think something's really cool and I want to show you that slide of the brain because it fascinates me, like what part of our brain fires up when we're learning something, then I want to share that with you and I want to give it to you and I want you to give me something back. But think about this for a minute. Museums aren't just places where we give people things, where we're helping them learn a new thing. Museums can be places where we unlearn something. Why is that crucial in science? Just popcorn it around the room. Why is it crucial in science that instead of teaching somebody something new, we might want to break a myth? We might want to correct a fallacy. We might want to get somebody to think differently about a bias that they might have. Like, in what different ways is that critical for people to understand the world around them?
Yeah.
Gives just popcorn it around and in talk with yourselves and but yeah, why would museums want to help people unlearn things?
Because at times it's not intuitive to think things for people, and as we talk about kids, so it is really difficult in a way that you can't think of Earth as a spherical place, right? It is just not imaginable intuitively. But to make them, so that is something that is required to be unlearned in order to understand that how gravity works or how what is surface tension, all those things. Well, those are complex, rather complex topics. But yeah, we need to unlearn those things in order to get on to the next thing. So one thing is like why, like there are still people who believe that Earth is flat. So one is that, like, these are just examples that why we need to unlearn. So like one is that example and others.
And also, ma'am, ultimately, we want to develop, well, we want them to develop scientific temper. So, we want them to think critically, and also the fact that science can change at times. So, we want them to, like constantly be aware of that fact that everything has to be tested and then taken into consideration and not just believe just like that. So, when we point out these things, then maybe we can, develop them overall and not just give them facts and give them particular information.
Yeah, so at times things seem logical but need not be scientifically correct. Yeah, Nikhil.
It can also, until and unless we change the pre-existing knowledge, it can entangle with the later knowledge acquisition part. So it is very important, right, to untangle those or rather unlearn those. For example, we can see there's a thing called a fish is a fish. So for a kid who just, for a fish, he has just seen the fishes around him. And if we put it over water and tell it to describe how is the elephant, he will just describe it's a fish with a long, very big trunk and a very big body. And similarly with all the animals, it will work on the data which it has until now. So yeah, it is very important to introduce new stuff for this unlearning part is to be sure.
Yeah, basically the museum is a place where different and various socio and the cultural background people are visiting. So they have their cultural belief and basically the customized belief are there, society beliefs are there, which may be scientific or unscientific. To break this belief, basically museum can opt the scientific methodology to deliver the scientific concept and scientific temper to the common man.
And I believe that is not only museum, even if you study science, then let's say in early stages of classes, a student learns light goes in a straight line. So that is very true for them. But that's not the final thing, because later on while they are studying the diffraction, they also read that light can bend during while it's passing through narrow edge of something. And also same thing, light, sometime they learn that light acts as a wave when they're doing some experiments like young slit, double slit, or some diffraction phenomena, interference phenomena. And at the end, they understand light can behave also particle when they are learning the photoelectric effect. And at the end, they understand light can act both as a wave and particle. So a lot of learning and then also unlearning. It's a not only process of museums, but it is a, I guess, study of science also works like that way.
I would go so far as to say, and I'm loving this, thank you, that unlearning is part of us, our social and cultural context too. The idea that we all have bias, and back to one of my favorite brain subjects, our bias mechanisms in our brain are among the strongest, and they happen totally subconsciously. So I don't necessarily know that I'm disagreeing with you when we are approaching a subject that I don't know much about. I don't even know that I'm disagreeing with you, or I don't even know that I'm denying it. I don't even know that I'm stuck on light as a straight line rather than a wave or a particle. I might know those things if I have higher education and I have already experienced it. But for most of us, when we approach a new subject, we are starting from preschool, or we really are at the beginning. And so part of what is the cool thing that museums can do is help people understand that learning is this process, that information changes, and that we naturally have this instinct to deny, because that's the part of our monkey brain that saved our lives evolutionarily. And it's fascinating that your brain didn't evolve all in one fell swoop, right? That our brainstem is this more ancient part of our brain. And when you look at the functions that it controls, it makes sense. Like, oh yeah, millions of years ago, in order to survive, everybody had to have that. But the part that's in the front of our skull is the more highly evolved part. I say that because the denial mechanisms are in our monkey brain. And those centers of our brain are really hard to open, mostly because we don't know that we're denying it. Like, it's really easy to see when you're talking with someone or you're presenting something that is shocking to people. And you visually can see by watching them in front of the exhibit or whatever, the look on their face, the confusion, the frustration, maybe anger, maybe just like, I don't even agree with that and I'm going to walk away. They demonstrate those behaviors to us, and we can see that if we're watching them, if we're doing visitors, observation, but they don't know that they're doing it. And so that's why exhibitions have to really intentionally think about presenting content in a way that makes people stop and almost say to themselves, hold up. You think you know what I'm talking about, or you may think you know what's going on here. But even scientists only 5 minutes ago discovered that it's not that way. Or only now we really, really understand the environmental crisis, the global crisis about water, or access to clean water. You know, like, I guess when we really drill down into a subject and the many places where people may be following the narrative and then where they fall off the truck, where do they stop believing? So it's important as you're writing scripts and you're trying to frame up what your stories are, what are the stories that you want to tell people and why? The other piece of this is that these things in our brain happen in a nanosecond. Like, it doesn't take people a long time to decide that they disagree. That happens before they're even conscious of it. And so maybe at the end of the day, it's like, well, think about it this way. Our brains emotionally tag things. If something makes me feel curious, I tag it happy, or I tag it stay. I tag it give that my attention because I'm comfortable. If a thing makes me uncomfortable, or I'm bored, or I can't even get to it because there's such a long line, I'll never get my chance and I don't want to wait, I tag it unfriendly or inaccessible or not for me. That's a simple little breadcrumb to keep in mind from a teaching perspective and a public communication of science perspective, because it can be easier to emotionally tag something in a positive way than we might think when we're dealing with really complicated subjects. What does that mean? That means that if you do a little bit of research and you know that people respond really well to this graphic of this forest, and they like that picture, or they seem to like that image as a way to introduce a topic more than the picture of the empty tin can, then you can think that if you want to tell the story and the forest image is relevant, you've got these two images, the forest and the empty tin can. But you test and you know that people are like, I don't really, that tin can confuses me. I don't know why that tin can is there. What could that possibly have to tell me? Don't show them the tin can first. Show them the forest. Show them the thing that is the inviting way into the story that you want to share, that you need to share. And be conscious of and intentional with this idea that because our brain is constantly tagging things, good, bad, right, wrong, for me, not for me. That's as complicated as it gets. Those simple things happen. And if they happen and I say it's not for me, or it makes me uncomfortable, or I'm frustrated by what it is that you're trying to say because I'm not getting it, then my brain shuts down. And you may have lost me for the whole rest of the visit. Maybe not. Maybe I run over to another exhibition and there's something full of color and sound and stuff that kind of feels like me that I can get and I understand. And you can hook me back again. But I think sometimes we tend to make things more complicated than they actually are. And by that, I mean, there isn't any subject on the face of the earth that you couldn't teach a 6-year-old. There's nothing. You might not believe me. The denial centers in your brain are going, Karen, it's too complicated, you know? Or you can't possibly teach a 6-year-old about light as a particle because they didn't even study light as a straight line yet. Well, who cares? Do they have to study light as a straight line first? couldn't you find a way to teach them about a particle if that was important? I hope that I'm not going too far in some kooky direction. It's just that formal education and the way we all were taught has us thinking that sometimes that learning is more complicated than it actually really is. And that's the beauty and the passion of working in a science museum, of working in an informal environment, because your creativity and your determination to break through the barriers that prevent us from being able to learn, the social barriers, the intellectual barriers, the emotional ones, the cognitive ones, the physical ones, people who show up and have different learning disabilities, physical disabilities, all of those things seem really daunting. And then we put the pressure on ourselves to make exhibitions good for everyone because the public, the whole entire public, is our audience. And some of them are really little, and some of them are really old. And some of them know a lot about science and already come loving it, and some know nothing and don't think they're going to like it. But these basic, simple cues, when you read, a part of your brain lights up. When you see, a part of your brain lights up. When you speak, a different part of your brain lights up. When you put your hands on something and you do something mechanical, a different part of your brain is engaged. And the whole point is to just be really intentional about weaving those things together in a really nice recipe that helps people have a positive experience with the thing that you want to talk to them about, because that's what's more likely to get coded and stick in their head. So back toward the philosophy of education, and all of the stuff that sometimes makes our job seem more complicated than it is. In the museum language where we speak about relevant, contextual, engaging, appropriately challenging, helping people get into the flow of it. But that's really all that these things mean. And they are, it's just an easy bag of tools to carry with you as you move forward in your careers, no matter which direction you go. Because at the end of the day, it isn't just about learning in museums or informal learning in public spaces. It's just about learning. It's about how we learn about one another and how we coexist in the world together and how we enjoy it and share it and contribute. And so that's one thing that I'll say. The more that I've been in a professional venue, the more I realize that the things that we do in our professional lives and the content that we love, the science and the communication that we care so much about, it's what makes our world better, right? It's not just the world that happens inside the different spaces of NCSM. You're engaging with people who go home at night, who go back to their schools, and you're giving them something, or you're taking something away that maybe was a bias that we want to change to help people be able to more fully engage in science accurately. But anyhow, that's the sandbox that is the learning in museums that you all are creating and that you are there, with such excitement trying to be able to develop. I guess I just want to pause here for a second and say curiosity is the antidote to denial. What does that mean? If you can make me curious, especially about something I think I don't understand or that does not feel like me, you've got me. Really have the chance to share some new information with me. So just like denial is this almost automatic, it is an automatic reflex that happens in our brain, so is curiosity. And that happens just as fast and unexpectedly and gorgeously as the thing that tamps down learning. So, we're on this seesaw all the time as the storytellers and the researchers and the people who guide and develop the content in museums or wherever it is that you all take this. But just remembering a few basic things, people might be more inclined to disagree even if they don't know it. But I have a few tricks up my sleeve that are really useful. And one of them is understanding that curiosity is actually pretty easy to tickle. It's pretty easy to provoke curiosity. So when you work together on teams and you're planning exhibitions or you're developing content for a public program or you're writing the script for a video, or any kind of public communication, carry around with you the idea and challenge yourself all the time throughout your script, throughout whatever your presentation is. Is anybody in the room curious about this now? Am I even curious about it? Use yourself as a litmus test. And if you can keep yourself curious, even though you're specialists, you're at least reminding yourself that you want other people to be curious too. And then you're going to think about how to help them do that.
नाही ना ऍज इट इज व्हॉट्सअप में भेज दो उसको हाँ बस
Can you say that again? I think I didn't fully hear you.
I don't think it was meant for you. I think someone just left their mic open. You may continue. please.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's better. Thank you. All right, let's continue. So just to pull this into the real world, that not just me, I mean, America is in a crisis, and you see that, and I'm curious what your take on what is going on here is, and if you feel like over the course of your lives you can personally relate to this time that seems like such a crisis here, because we're at a tipping point, and we need to make it be a tipping point to help alleviate this crisis in our ability to exercise our freedom and education. I realized that how we learn and what we learn is totally predicated on whether or not there is the environment and the commitment to be factually honest, to share real information, and to respect other voices and other opinions, especially when they're being expressed in a way that in the United States is protected. Freedom of speech is protected. The right to show up at a protest is protected, and to not die because you went out there to disagree with something that your government is doing. And because it's gotten so severe here, for example, the executive order about not teaching woke history. And yeah, how very divided we are now. And so people have retracted. Either they've been fired and forced to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of people, especially in Washington, have been forced to have been denied their jobs, or their jobs have been eliminated. And there's this environment of Nazism that means, if you don't agree with us, we will use all the power at our disposal to force you to agree. And I've never seen anything like it in my life of 64 years. And it reminds me of another story that I just wanted to share, because what's the antidote to when public communication is jeopardized because many someones who are in power have really think that they can just silence public communication, period. Silence it. So what's the antidote to that? How do we here in the United States or any place else in the world that is experiencing something like this, what do we do? And one of the global threats to education in the United States that many of us are trying to stand up against right now is the censorship that's happening in museums and the censorship that's happening about public programs and public communication. So an organization called Citizen Historians for the Smithsonian got started here in the Washington, D.C. area, that I sent around a little story that was written by our colleague and friend Gretchen Jennings. Thousands of people, whether they were museum professionals or not, many have never been, volunteered to go into all of the Smithsonian museums and, literally thousands of exhibitions across Washington, D.C. and across all the states in the United States, not just Smithsonian museums, and document the content in the exhibitions before the organizations might be forced to remove that content. So the story that I shared is about something that just happened here on Sunday, just a few days ago, where one of the people who started the Citizen Historian group went into the National Portrait Gallery with printed copies of the original label that accompanied the Donald Trump presidential portrait. So here, every president has a portrait. They get to choose the person who does the painting. They get to decide whether they like the painting or not, and whether they feel that it's appropriate to hang in the National Gallery. All of that happened, but they don't get to write the label, typically, that goes along with it, except in this case, our current president, Donald Trump, decided that he didn't like the label because it included information about his former impeachment and, other bad things, right? Not just the good things. Except keep in mind, everybody else, every other former president that has a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery has a similar kind of label. It's a story about their life and their career in office. And not all of it is glowing, except he refused to accept that. And what ended up happening is now they call them tombstone labels, just this tiny little label. What's this guy's name? What year was he born? What years was he president? That's it. And so right now, that's the label that the original label got removed recently. And the label that's up there is just this little abbreviated tombstone version of a label. And the guy who is one of the citizen historians thought, well, maybe people would like to actually see what the original label was. And I can share that information. But of course, it's not legal to hand out flyers in a Smithsonian museum. And so he was eventually asked to leave, and he did so. But if it's like that here now, like I guess I just wanted to share with you that the situation in terms of censorship in museum exhibitions is so critical that content has been removed. It's being removed right now. We've all gone out and with photographs. We've documented I was assigned to do the Postal Museum, but probably because, it's all these tiny little stamps. Who would think that there could be some content that would be so controversial about postage stamps around the world, but there is. And so we've all tried to do our part in documenting these exhibitions and the way that they looked last year or 3 weeks ago, because they're in the process of being forcibly removed. I guess I just want to pause there because for me, this is the crucible of our lives right now in the United States, especially for us in the education space who care about sharing honest, relevant, and inclusive information. And just, I want your help just right now for a few minutes to brainstorm ways to help mitigate this, and also to share if in your experience, where do you perceive threats to education, the way that you organizationally, professionally, would hope that it can happen, and where you're happy with that, give me some inspirational examples, because right now the United States doesn't have any. It's a little too strong to say, but it really, really feels that way. And so we can't do these great things about what does learning look like in your brain and how do you help people with their denial mechanisms when the whole government push is denial. You know what I mean? It's like you're just pushing a boulder up a hill that's gonna keep rolling down on you. But I'm gonna hand the mic back to the class because I've talked for too long, but I just wanted to set learning and public education and public communication in the context for which it is, the environment that we're in right now, and why it's actually hard to be an educator or a communicator of any authenticity. What are your thoughts about what's going on here in terms of the censorship coming from the government currently?
Yeah, so firstly, I would like to start with, I don't know, I just think that it is relevant to say here, since you said like some words of inspiration or something. So we say that in Hindi, yes, मैं हमेशा ऐसा नहीं रहेगा, ये बदल जाएगा, but what just means that time will change. It always changes. It changed from better to this, then it will get reversed as well. And also, we need to, not need to, just remember these things every day, that people do find a way out. So whatever is happening, no matter what the government does, people do have power. It was the power of people who made him the president or whatever the situation is. But so the power of people is definitely something that is need to be considered. Also with education, yeah, it's really sad to see that things which are facts that is to be known for the coming generations who have not seen these things. They should know what happened and all our history and what is currently happening. But I don't know, maybe this is the time when non-formal things come up. Like if you can't do it in a formal situation, not in schools, not in institutions where government has control, then people come up with non-formal things, informal things. So I think that then there's a role of science communicators or any kind of communicators in that sense, which will bring up something like that. And also things like indicative things that I see, like we have in India. So during this festival of Holi, especially, it is said that no one, people don't mind anything. So what people do is they indicate towards the things. In their poetry or anything, they indicate towards what is happening and they won't say it specifically. So, like, it is for, of course, for the intelligent being who understands, who doesn't. But yeah, that's all I can say. That yeah, time will change, and also informal setups are really important in these times, which are institutions which are not controlled by government or which.
Yeah, especially in the times of social media where people are largely influenced by the kind of content they see online. So I think it's really important that though we are, providing offline education in the form of, science museums and science centers, we really need to step up, and in the age of, digitalization, we need to do something online too, so that we educate them online and try to change their perspectives. Like, as my friend did suggest, like the younger generation, especially us, we do need to know about the history and how things have been. So only then we will be able to understand the present or how to act in the future. So we cannot just go about protesting things just because we don't like it unless we know how it was before and the exact history. So I think this is something that I think.
Yeah, social media.
Here I request to carry on, ma'am, lecture part, and discussion will be carry on even later. We should stick to the lecture, ma'am. This is from a request from my side. I will discuss it later on, I think.
Okie dokie. I realize that we've been going for almost an hour and people might need to step out to use the restroom, or 90 minutes is a long session. And so if anybody needs to step out and use the restroom, please feel free to do that. The transition here between what's going on, government support, like it's about ideology, right? So we can go back to education. Education for all is an ideal. Museums are awesome, terrific places for that to be happening. When we talk about the context for education, the context does shift, and that's what the class was just pointing out. Where did it come from? People will find a way to work through that. I believe those things too, but I also want to throw in a couple of complicating factors that have maybe nothing to do with politics. So we just started talking about online, and everything around the world right now is artificial intelligence and AI, and use this AI guide to come up with your lecture. Use this AI guide to help you write the label, or, there literally isn't anything that we have to do for ourselves in terms of like the thinking through, I ask Perplexity, my little AI buddy, a question, when's the first time that this reference was used? And it gives me an answer right away. I can decide whether or not I agree with that, or I think that that's the best answer. But part of where education, non-formal and formal education, is moving is this very blurry line because of digital tools. And digital tools have actually changed the way our brains work. Now I'm harping on my favorite subject, but if you look at the trajectory of learning, let's go way back. Let's go back to like the printing press and the first books. How did we learn with a book? What were the things that happened, whether you were a kid or an adult, and you were given a book or you picked up a book? What's the first thing that happens, or one of the first thing that happens when you open a physical book? Shout out what you're thinking. What happens when you open a physical book? Not a
Then,
trick question.
Some good question.
yeah,
Whoever is holding the book first tries to smell the book or the pages. Exactly. What they smell like.
And we also look for pictures in the book.
Yeah.
That's
we also have something new will come up if we read that book. So that compel to read this book comes up.
The writer takes you to their world. You will also check for the number of pages.
Things that just make me really excited. The writer takes you to their world. Let's unpack that for a minute. Because where I was trying to move you, I'm, being a little manipulative, but this is really, really important. In less than 100 years, our brains actually have changed in the way that they process information because of the speed with which digital technology bombards us constantly. So when you cracked a book, especially if it was happening 100 years ago, where we didn't have so much stimulation from other technology present 24/7, the book brought you into the imagination of another person or another place and another time. How did it do that? It did that by turning down all the other noise. When we used to read books, and by used to, I don't necessarily just mean us here in this room. I mean historically, like a reader 100 years ago who was so excited to have a book in their hand, to be able to smell it, to be able to feel it, maybe even to own it. It was theirs, or they borrowed it from a library and they gave it back. Or it could just, doesn't have to even be a book. It could be a magazine, but physically printed material. It closed us off, and it brought us into a world where we were really paying attention. Everything else needed to shut off in order for the book to turn on. That's what reading was. Reading was this intense focus. And if you only wanted to read for 5 pages, you were focused for 5 pages. If you had to cram and read the whole book to study for the test the next day, you were going to focus on that book for as long as it took for you to get to the end of it because you had to. Does that ever happen now? Ever? Are we ever sitting with a book in a room where this thing isn't pinging at us? I don't know. For me, especially because I like to read at night and I like to quiet myself down after the day, by reading, I still will be alone with a book, but it might only last for 20 minutes if that's how tired I am. But it's becoming an almost extinct phenomenon because this and these screens, interrupt us. And they're designed to do that. They're designed to say, hey, Karen, hey, NCSM class, hey, everybody, I have this pair of shoes. I know you were shoe shopping the other day and you're still looking for a pair of boots. What about this? I'm sending you this commercial because I know you. I've learned you. AI is helping me gather information about what you want to have for dinner tonight. Because you use these tools to engage with the world, to shop, to study, to learn, to communicate. And now they know me. And they can just pop up at any minute and say, what about that? That's not the way the world used to work. And so, in terms of kids today or young adults, our audiences in museums, part of what I don't want to forget is our brains used to be able to give wider, more focused attention to the very concept of learning. The very essence of what it means to learn in a digital environment with AI is wildly, wildly different than the more authoritarian version of learning that I grew up with, like there is a teacher, they know something, you listen to them because they've got something that might be good for you to have too. And so free choice, which is what museums are all about, free choice learning, has exploded. It's like mushroom clouded into the space where I think we need to realize what people do is take very thin slices of things now because our attention is shorter, because we're willing to be interrupted. We want to be interrupted. That's what this thing does. Oh, you don't want to read about that news? I'm going to give you something else, like we don't even have to ask it to give us information. It does it automatically now. So when we bring people into our environments like museums, even though we say it's informal learning in an informal space where it's free choice, what does free choice mean in an AI world? In the digital world where we're multitasking and doing 5 things at the same time simultaneously, and if we're not able to be that way, we don't like it anymore, right? That's why they take phones away from kids when they go to school now. Because there's the fear of missing out. Like there's all these acronyms of things that like never used to exist. FOMA. And now more newer versions, not just FOMA anymore. It isn't just fear of missing out, but it's like 4 generations after FOMA. FOMA was like what was happening in the 1990s. What's happening now?
JOMO, joy of missing out. We do enjoy it. Thank God I was not there.
But let's just unpack this a little bit because it is the way I wanted to end. Open up this conversation to the confluence of technologies, the abundance of information, but then a few fundamentals like how do we know what's true? How do we know when we're looking at something that actually was, it's a nature scene. Wait, did the bear really do that? Did the elephant really do that? Like last week, something was going around that there was this cow in Australia that was the first known bovine or like documented, not known. Maybe they do this, but the cow picked up a brush and turned it over and was scratching her back. And it's like, oh, we only thought primates were, or whatever, like, okay, not just primates. I know that other animals use tools, but I guess people didn't think that cows did it. And is it real? Okay, probably it really was. It wasn't just an engineered thing, but what is the role of museums in helping people be able to navigate towards truth in scientific research, truth in what we see, truth in what we hear? And I understand there are many truths, not just one, but with the ability to manipulate information and people's perhaps lack of questioning, should we step back from the content, whatever the content is, and also help society be able to rigorously interrogate information, to be able to know that what they're experiencing, learning, feeling, thinking is based somewhere in some fact? Like, is that a concern?
Yeah, of course, it's a concern that you are always alert. Firstly, you always need to be alert to know whether it's real or not. So yeah, it's concerning, but again, the censorship must be on things like that, which manipulate masses' minds. So yeah, we need more regulation towards it. As the new technology comes, we need more laws and policies to regulate it. And like, what else?
In our another course, we are debating on somewhat this topic, whether it is good for society or it is bad for society. So yeah, we had two teams and we were fighting each other. Yeah, so a lot of discussion went there. But yeah, I guess personally, yes, I'm concerned. When we think about my daughter, well, she will grow up. Whether this critical thinking and all these analytical skills will grow up properly, or it will be influenced by all these tools. So that personally, I'm little yes concerned and worried. Yes.
What education? Basic education. Also, education regarding these things is really required because, as my friend suggested, that
Especially as people in science, I think we're just too quick to celebrate any scientific invention. We're just like, oh, okay, they released a paper on this. Oh, they did this and that. But we're not really thinking about its consequences. So in one part, people do say, okay, technology is bad. But on the other side, they are the same people who celebrate when a paper is published or, so people just want recognition these days. So nobody wants to talk about its downsides and say no to the latest technologies. So I think not us, maybe the older generations, they are in a place where they got to develop that critical thinking before they got used to the technology. But these days, the future generations, they are just given that technology even before they develop that capability of thinking on their own. Yeah. So they don't really know how to operate or what to think, accept, and say no to. So
times of instant gratification, but reading. That's the thing that before you even need it, you're given that thing.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. I mean, and not every school system in the US does it, but even trying to get kids to turn their phones in at the beginning of the day and then pick them up at the end of the day, or letting them uncheck it for 15 minutes at lunchtime or whatever. And this is going in a different direction, but it's the confluence of several factors that are playing out over the course of our lives that I think are just important for us to step back from and interrogate. Just this notion that maybe now more than ever, we need to question why we think the way we think, but then also what we feel from a historic context is important for bringing the world around us forward, but by knowing where we came from. The historian in me wants people always to understand the history of the evolution of science and how why that means something in the particular context of climate change or genetically engineered foods, or like we can turn in many directions and say, what does it mean when Monsanto creates seeds that only have one crop, and that you can't do what people did for thousands and thousands of years, which was collect the seeds to save for the next crop, and to be able to do that by looking at the plants and figuring out which ones were healthy and you want to save these seeds for these specific reasons. Well, now it doesn't matter because everything is engineered for one life only. And like, to me, that's almost an AI version of what we're talking about in digital space, because we do it on many levels. Genetic manipulation too. So like, what did that real plant ever really look like? Because now we've engineered it to be resistant to bugs, and it doesn't need too much water, and you can throw a lot of pesticides on it and it isn't going to die. So what did that plant really start out? What's the heirloom version of the plant? And to me, it's just, yes, it's a little scary, and it's important to keep questioning and show people that we question. And I think that, especially in the position of scientific authority, where you all are headed, and communication authority, museums have power. People want to listen. They recognize that there's something special there, and that they have the chance to get close to it for a while during their visit or online. And we are just at a point where people have so much access to information without knowing what's fake, fake news, fake engineered content. And again, here in Washington, D.C., the fake news thing, it's so prevalent that you stop believing anything that you hear, on any given day, because you know you need to question it and go back to a source and do the research and verify the original source of the information to know where you stand, if you stand on firm ground or not. And yeah, and somehow in my mind, because I'm a generalist and I see things as being very interconnected, I see the manipulation of data, whether it's visual, whether it's technical, whether it's just flat out lying, the idea that virtual agents, like human beings that would look like us, can be in 7 or 12 or 100 or 1,000 different places at the same time, selling socks on some infomercial, but it's not a recorded version of us. It's a live artificial intelligence version of us being beamed into this space, doing things in real time that previously would have had to be recorded and edited and produced and shared. If we can turn all those channels on to move communication in that direction, why do people need us, right? And what does it mean to be a curator? And what does it mean to be a communicator, but in this authentic way? So I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is just reevaluating our human capacities and trying to find ways to share that are joyful and constructive, and also distinguishing what people do, why people are, like we assume this thing like, oh, we have stuff to teach. There are people who want to learn, and that dynamic is just going to roll on forever and ever and ever because that's the way the world works. But the world is working in so many different ways now. And part of it is because of digital technology. Part of it is because of intelligent agents that can flood us with a lot of information. And then it's like, maybe in that way, there's another responsibility for museums to ground people in the history and the cultural context of a thing, or to help them interrogate, question. To be good analyzers and to be able to understand objectivity and rationalism and using your mind in all the many beautiful ways that our minds are meant to be used, instead of just being passive recipients and receivers of all of these channels of communication. Okay, well, that wasn't the neatest wrap up, but in the couple of minutes that we have still, let's open it up to either revisiting something. If there's a topic in learning that's a more formal subject that you would like to discuss, I'm happy to. We can do that. I've just intentionally steered clear of, learning theory throughout the millennia and how it's changed, because we are in a world that is benchmarked by so many different things, and our access to information makes life richer and in many ways more compelling, and yet there's sort of a cautionary tale there as well, especially about museums' roles in helping to curate information and help people understand all these changes in the world around us.
Thank you, ma'am, for this lively lecture. Now the floor is open for discussion. Any question from students? Those who wish to ask from ma'am.
Hello, that was a really good session and discussions. I actually wanted to ask about, as you talked about being stimulated, that we always have screens and all those things. So I wanted to know about the balance of exhibits that should be there, or what is your opinion about it? So when we talk about interactive exhibits, they do engage you wholly, and for people like ADHD or autism, that may be a bit too much, like since a museum is a big place, like comparatively big place to visit. So what do you think should be the design of the museum, that how should we balance these interactive exhibits and the exhibits that are comparatively not that overstimulating?
Well, I think if we sort of aggregate a bunch of research over the last 50 years, 50 years ago, science museums said, well, there's something for everybody. And this can be the noisy room where there's hyper stimulation. And this can be the quiet place where you might sit down and watch a film. And this can be the physically active place where you're going to run around outside and do, go climb on the rocks or do whatever. We tended to separate those things out because it's like, oh, well, if you're showing up to a restaurant and everybody who wants to eat veg, okay, you go this way. Everybody who wants non-veg, okay, you go this way, because we assumed that people knew what they needed and they would be able to find it in the environment. But now we know that actually we want to try to move people a little further in the complexity of their experience. So if you thought you wanted non-veg, we want you to be thinking about veg because there's something really interesting there for you. And we're not trying to change anybody's mind about it, and maybe that's a bad example but I just like to cook and I certainly love to eat. But we used to think, like, make it easy for people to see their style and recognize it. If I'm a quiet contemplator, then okay, don't go into that room because that's crazy and that's where all the screaming is happening with the third graders. Go over here. It's the history and culture exhibit. Oh, it's quieter, whatever. We're trying to stretch our minds and stretch the experience. And so blending it and making the map, sort of the geography of the exhibit be mixed is way more important. And simple things like a place to sit or take time out or easy to navigate instructions. Like, people will have more energy to spend on the challenging things that are really the right challenges that curatorially and educationally we want them to spend the energy on, if they don't have to struggle to find the bathroom. Like, make it easy to know where to hang your coat or there's a water fountain. Like, make these things so simple that you can spend your precious energy struggling to understand that light is a particle and a wave at the same time. Don't make it trouble to do the simple things. Some of it is like, again, just really, really basic. We want the easy stuff to be as easy as possible, because then people have the juice and the energy and power in their batteries to give us a little more of their attention for the sticky stuff. That's a very simple way of looking at it, and it's not, but I believe that there's a syncopation, there's a high note, there's a low note, there's excitement, there's calm, there's restive moments, there's stimulating moments. And I think that in terms of activating all those centers of the brain, you don't just want to turn on the reading mode and have it be a wall full of, labels. You want all of those parts of the brain to be stimulated. And I understand autism and cognitive challenges are special cases because of attention, because of overstimulation. So I'm not speaking now about those situations. I'm just speaking in a general public kind of a way.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. We'll keep those things in mind, definitely. Also, one personal question, since I'm also from botany and steered into science communication, so I would like to know, like, what inspired you? Why did you not go further into lab kind of research or field kind of research and came here for museums and science communication? Like what inspired you?
One of my first jobs at the Smithsonian was in the Department of Botany, and I was the research assistant to a bunch of different curators. And all I did all day was look at plant specimens, pressed plant specimens in the herbarium. We scanned them, we cataloged them. We had to catalog 60,000 plant specimens a year or whatever. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I have to do that, like it wasn't, I'm a generalist, and I think people know whether they really want to specialize in one area or whether they want whether the world is going to make them curious from a bunch of different directions. And so I luckily learned that about myself early on. And it's not any more complicated than that. I just knew that I wanted to be able to walk into a museum, have the keys to the back door, know how to run the freight elevator, go down into the basement where the exhibits are being manufactured, talk to the cabinet shop, talk to the electricians, and then go upstairs to the 5th floor, the C-suite or whatever, and be able to sit with the director of the organization and make plans for the future. For me, it's like going across all of those levels all the time is very important.
Thank you so much for sharing that with
Can I
us.
ask you one question?
Sure.
Can you listen to me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
There is a term used as whole brain learning. Is it possible for museums to create an experience that contributes to whole brain learning?
I think in a way that's what we've been talking about. The idea that first you have to be able to see inside here, and we don't usually think that way. Like, hey, what's going on in our head? We know how we feel, but we don't know what parts of our brain are making us feel that way and what the drivers are for how we connect with the content. And so for me, yes, whole brain learning is possible, and it means you use your eyes and your brain engages in a different way than when you use your mouth and you speak to someone about a thing, or when you're physically manipulating a thing, like that's a different part of my brain too. And so I hope that what people can take away from the talk today is that whole brain learning is auditory, visual, mechanical, technical, and that the more pieces of our brain we're stimulating, the more our whole brain is going to be involved in the learning, and more things will stick if we take the whole brain approach. That's why, that's sorry, I had a book here, but it's like why we care so much about labels. That's key to whole brain learning. How we package content and break it down for it to be, bite-sized nuggets so that our brain can have a chance to chew on them. But yes, I very much believe in whole brain learning, and I think museums are beautiful places to open those doors for many different people because it's a free choice environment, and that's our whole brain right there. Free choice.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, I thank you a lot. It's been so nice to spend this time together, and you put a smile on my face, and thank you for reaching out and inviting me to participate.
Great seeing you, Karen, after such a long time. And you keep healthy. You look very good. Keep it up.
Ma'am, as we are concluding this, I have a very a last question, actually an advice. So, what's one of the skill that you learned on your own, not in any formal education or any other situation, but something that has taught you a lot of things in your life, and it as well helped you while you were at the Smithsonian Institute as a curator and also a research assistant? So, what would be something that you would like to share with us and let us know that we should also integrate that in our life?
Wow, what that question is like such an honor because it presumes that I have something worth worth sharing. I mean, that's such an honor. I'm in awe by your question. You want to know what somebody told me a long time ago, but that I've heard since I was a kid, and I think you really got me thinking. I don't have a PhD, right? Okay, I have some graduate education, a master's degree, but when you go to a place like the Smithsonian or any museum, you know, erudite, there can be academically, intellectually snobby, has the power in the museum, who has the power at the table to make decisions. Traditionally, educators are not the ones with the power. People, you know, who study from the technical side or are more curatorial, you know, have held on to the power because of their more extensive education. But here's the thing. If you're curious about any subject, about everything, if you're as curious about how the exhibit is wired and how the buttons are going to hold out and not break, as you are about the story that that exhibit is telling, to me, that's like a self-taught skill that has opened more doors and kept me happier as a professional, as a person, because no matter where you walk, if you walk in the woods, you're curious. If you walk down the busiest market street, you're curious. If you walk into a room full of physicists and you didn't study physics, you're curious because we can stretch our minds in any direction that we want. And there's no content, there is no story on earth. There's no piece of work. There's actually nothing that's not worth being curious about. You don't have to like it. You don't have to spend your life doing it. But even if you dip in and out of all of this gorgeous content that you have the chance to experience in museums, and by content, I just don't mean the stories that we want to share with the public, but I mean what our colleagues do, you know, what the people who are cleaning the bathrooms do. We're a community and our curiosity is limitless. And somebody told me that about myself once. It was like, hey, Karen, don't ever let anybody tell you that you need a PhD or you need all of this supersonic experience to be able to go and do that thing. Your curiosity is enough. And to me, that was some of the best advice I've ever gotten. And it made me realize that it is a special skill for me. And it's my little magic. It's my magic power. My curiosity is my superpower. So I hope that was helpful.
Ma'am, I just have,
That is indeed very helpful. Thank you.
ma'am, I also just want to ask this one last question. That like when we talk about, you know, you, I think people mostly associate you with science museums and your contribution towards that. But what is one thing that you would like to be known for other than your contribution towards museums? Like your entire personality. It could be anything. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to fly to the UK and I'm going to join a group called Driving Ukraine. And my friend and I, now that I don't have a job, said, you have no reason to not participate in this thing because now you can be a volunteer. So all the people who volunteer for this organization called Driving Ukraine raise money to buy used vehicles. We go to England, we join this convoy. My group is Convoy 54. And then we drive the vehicles across Europe and bring them to Ukraine. And we'll drop them in Lviv. So that's the western part of the country that so far has been a little safer. But part of what I want to be known for is that humanity, right? helping each other, caring about the world, being kind, trying to do good for our families and our friends and the people that we know, but especially trying to do good for people that we may never see, because that's why we're here. For me, that's like, I exist to try to be helpful, and the more different ways I can find to do that, it makes me happy and gives my life purpose, completely outside of anything professional. So be thinking about me in a couple of weeks. It should take 4 or 5 days to drive across Europe and get these vehicles into Ukraine. And then they bus us to the border and they tell us to walk back across into Poland because you dropped the car off that you were delivering to donate to the nonprofit organizations that are rescuing injured civilians. That's how the vehicles will be used. And then they say, okay, walk across the border and make your way home now from Poland, and that's where I'll be.
Thank you, ma'am. That was interesting.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other fellow who wishes to ask?
It was a really interesting session, ma'am. It really, made us think a lot, and hopefully we'll meet in person sometime.
Would love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet, for the wonderful session.
Thank you, Nehru. It's so good to see you.
How are you, ma'am?
So nice.
When are
And
you
I'm
coming
sorry,
to India?
I see many familiar names on the screen, and I haven't given a shout out to everybody that I want to specifically say hello to, but it's really good to be here with old friends and with new ones.
Thank you.
You're welcome to India. Be our guest.
Well, you don't need to ask me twice.
Yeah.
All right, everybody.
Okay.
Take care. Thank you. Go out and do good
Yeah.
things in the world
Bye.
as you are.
Thank you, ma'am.
We extend our thanks to you, ma'am, for
Thank
sparing
you.
time
Thank
for
you
us.
very much.
Thank you,
My
sir.
pleasure.
Thank you.